I want to introduce Jim Herr from the Japanese American National Museum to welcome us to this venue.
Yes, thank you. And yes, maybe take a deep breath and relax. For those of you who had to fight all the traffic, thank you so much for being here. We are so honored to be able to host this event here at the Democracy Center. My name is Jim Herr, and I'm actually the director of the National Center for the Preservation of Democracy here at the Japanese American National Museum. How many of you have been to JANM before, been to the Democracy Center? Well, thank you, welcome back. For those of you who have not been here or don't know this, the museum sits at this location for a specific reason. It wasn't just because there was free available land. It was on this site out here on our plaza, which used to be the continuation of 2nd Street, or Central Avenue, I apologize, where in 1942, Japanese Americans from Los Angeles were ordered to report before being taken off to Santa Anita Racetrack, where they were housed in horse stalls and awaited processing to be taken to one of the America's concentration camps during World War II. A total of 37,000 Los Angelinos were rounded up. 120-some thousand Japanese Americans were incarcerated for that time. So this place holds a lot of history. It holds a lot of importance for the community, and that's what the Japanese American National Museum wants people to remember. It is a place for cultural celebration, but it is rooted in that story of incarceration and in the taking away of civil liberties and rights. And so the Democracy Center leans on that incredible history of Japanese Americans, and we contemporize it for broader audiences. And we host events like this because we think having these discussions is very, very important. It is a way for Japanese Americans and the broader community to show up. Housing is something that is guaranteed in the Declaration of Human Rights. And all too often in Los Angeles, even for middle-class people, it is something so difficult to get to these days. And so the work that's happening here to help this part of our community find housing, find shelter, find a way to a better future and a better tomorrow is so important, and we salute you for that work. We hope you enjoy your time here. Please do come back and see us. We have some amazing exhibits right now, one of which is our giant robot biennale, which is celebration of everything giant robot, which if you don't know, has a huge history at UCLA. So please come back and see that along with our core exhibition, Common Ground, which traces the history of Japanese Americans here in Los Angeles. So thank you again. Thank you for making the trip down. Try and relax and have a wonderful evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Good evening. I'm Vinit Mukhija, a professor of urban planning at the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs. I'm delighted to have all of you join us tonight. On behalf of Interim Dean Anastasia Loqueto-Sideres and all my colleagues on the faculty and staff, it's my pleasure to welcome you to this UCLA Luskin Lecture. Tonight's presentation, like our school itself, is named for Meyer and Rene Luskin, whose generosity and vision have made much of what we do possible. We are fortunate to be associated with them. Before we continue, I want to recognize that as a land-grant institution, we at UCLA acknowledge and honor the sacrifice of the Gabrielino Tongva people, as they were the traditional land caretakers of Tawangar, the land upon which our campus now stands. On a more personal note, I have a courtesy appointment in Asian American Studies, and I'm keen to thank our hosts because the Japanese American National Museum has special importance for both the Japanese American and the broader Asian American Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander experience and struggles in the US. Relatedly, I want to acknowledge and condemn the terrible violence in the Middle East and the inexcusable violence on our campus against our students. For the most part, UCLA is an inspiring place. As a professor, I have witnessed and cherished the continuing growth of our university and the school into extraordinary places of learning. UCLA Luskin brings together scholars in public policy, social welfare, and urban planning to offer graduate and undergraduate degrees within one unified academic unit. Our common thread is social justice and a desire to make society better, to improve things. By uniting our disciplines and professions and finding common purpose, we hope to actively engage with complex issues and address them comprehensively. This Luskin Foundation is also essential to a new degree we'll add in fall 2025, the Master of Real Estate Development. The MRED will be a one-year graduate program administered from the Luskin School, but delivered with our cross-campus partners, including the Anderson School of Business, the Law School, and the UCLA Ziman Center for Real Estate, with active engagement, teaching, and mentoring from industry experts. It has been my pleasure to participate in developing and launching this degree as the designated program director. We intend to contextualize real estate development and its potential within the broader urban development context and an ambition of social justice. We want our graduates to fill an urgent need for inclusive and resilient developments in ways that have sometimes been ignored in traditional programs. We hope we can play an important part in creating a more diverse real estate development community and marketplace. Done well with sensitivity to environmental challenges and the needs of diverse urban populations, real estate development needs to contribute to sustainability, equity, and quality of life for all. We propose to prepare professionals who understand the profound effects of real estate development on urban life, city building, and economic and social opportunities, not only in Los Angeles, California, the US, but worldwide. Tonight's UCLA Luskin Lecture features a panel of esteemed speakers whose ideas, efforts, and achievements align perfectly with the goals and aspirations of the MRED and with our ongoing teaching and research efforts on housing at the Luskin School. I want to thank them all for their inspiring work and for being here. And it's now my pleasure to turn the program over to my dear friend and colleague, Professor Michael Lentz, Professor of Urban Planning and Public Policy. Michael is also the chair of our undergraduate program in Public Affairs and is the Associate Faculty Director at the UCLA Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies. He's a leading scholar of affordable housing policies, housing market inequities, and their effects on communities of color. I invite him to tell you more about tonight's panel.
Thank you so much, Vinit. I also want to begin by thanking a lot of people that made this evening possible. So we have several wonderful research centers at UCLA that played a role in this evening. The UCLA Bunch Center for African American Studies, the UCLA Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies, and the UCLA Ziman Center for Real Estate. And I can't name all of the staff that are making us look so good up here today, but I want to make sure that they feel appreciated because I appreciate them very, very much for what they do and for this evening. And Vinit, I want to echo your statements of concern and care, of course, about the violence on university campuses and including, of course, our own at UCLA. This has been a very difficult couple of weeks and more, but I'm inspired in a way that these weeks have, of course, their roots in something beautiful, which is the dogged determination of young people to peacefully bring an end to death and suffering thousands of miles away. And in my view, that determination is very clearly inspired by the fight for Black liberation here in this country, and is tied specifically to the campus protests of the 1960s in service of civil rights and against the Vietnam War. Whether or not our students' strategies or aims are perfectly right or just right now, I deeply admire their courage. Among other injustices in the world, the fight for Black liberation, of course, is still ongoing. Our panel today will discuss how we are addressing housing struggles in the Black community with some experts who are out there every day bringing housing and development opportunities to Black people in Minnesota and in Los Angeles. Housing and real estate development were instrumental in the concentration of Black disadvantage in U.S. cities. Government and private actors erected barriers to investment in Black communities and homeownership by Black households, producing a system that equates housing conditions with race. For decades, many Black neighborhoods have been locked in a spiral of devaluation, disinvestment, and deterioration. And when investments are made, low homeownership rates in Black neighborhoods mean many longtime residents do not benefit from rising property values, and they are increasingly priced out of their rental housing and perhaps even displaced. This panel discussion will feature Malcolm Johnson, CEO of Langdon Park Capital here in Los Angeles, which invests in affordable housing and workforce housing in Black and Latino communities. Malcolm, will you join us? And we will feature Malika Billingslea, Senior Development Advisor at NEOO Partners, a commercial real estate development and planning firm based in my proud hometown of St. Paul, Minnesota. And because this is Los Angeles, our three-time NBA champion, Devin George, is stuck in traffic. But we'll be here. You know we always show up eventually, right? And I guess I got to start by asking Malika to clarify, is there a professional sports career that I'm not aware of, because we have a NFL wide receiver to your left and a shooting guard in traffic?
Former NFL wide receiver.
Former.
Yeah,
We-
many years ago.
We can't get you back out there today?
No, not even if I wanted to.
I know exactly how you feel, but not really.
Yes,
Is
there
he-
is. There is. I am a professional affordable housing sprinter,
Okay. Hustling
to close the projects.
every day. Fantastic. The last thing, as far as housekeeping, I believe there is a Slido. Oh, there we go. Slido.com will be our organizer for questions. So there's your QR code. If you have questions that come up, you can type those into that little service app website thing, and then our miraculous people will bring them to me, and then we'll ask them, and it'll be amazing. So I wanted to begin with Malika. Your firm is based in Minnesota, again in lovely St. Paul. It's a great time of year to visit. There's not a lot of those times a year. You also have another location of NEOO Partners in Jackson, Mississippi. So can you just start off by telling us what kind of work NEOO does, and then why the second location in Jackson? Why can't we just stack all our capital in St. Paul?
let me get some capital first. It's one of the problems with affordable housing is that capital thing, right? So NEOO Partners, I am very new to NEOO Partners. NEOO Partners did not have affordable housing until I had a conversation with D'Angelo's, and he said, well, come on, let's do this. It's really creeping me out that my voice is this loud, I'm sorry. So the reason for being in Minnesota as well as in the Deep South is because we're following the migration. And the migration was from the Deep South to the steel mills in the Midwest. And now we want to come back down and connect both, because the connection is necessary for the growth and development of BIPOC people in general. Good enough?
Good.
Okay.
I gotta turn my mic on.
Hey, you want mine?
I'm back. No?
No.
It's on? There we go. I just need to get closer to it. I also do not want to hear the sound of my own voice. That's very interesting that you bring up so you're talking about not only the Great Migration of the early to mid 20th century, but also what we're seeing now as a reverse migration back to the South. That is absolutely fascinating to me. Those are pieces of analysis I've been working on. I'm not here to plug my book, but I do have a book that's on parts of this. And so the story there is, of course, that population has been moving south throughout the United States for several decades, and Black people are included in that migration. And I think one promising aspect of that is there's a lot of strong regional economic growth in the South that, in some cases, various populations are kind of attracted to when they're leaving, these steel mills that are not so much still functioning. So, that kind of population movement does have promise, I think, when we think about advancement of various populations that have been left behind. So turning to Malcolm, you're our LA-based developer on the panel. Can you just start telling us about Langdon Park Capital and how you came into the field? Like, how did this end up being your second career?
Yeah, so first of all, I really appreciate that this audience has found the time and energy to come discuss something that is so critical at this junction in our country's kind of economic revitalization. And that is really key. Our story was one of intentionality. I'm originally from Washington, D.C., so born and raised in a city that at the time I was growing up was known as Chocolate City. And I was only born and raised there because of intentionality. So I'll just take a step back and talk about what Langdon Park Capital does. We are a real estate investment management firm, so a private equity firm that invests in mostly workforce housing in Black and Latino communities. But my parents really started what became Langdon Park Capital. My mom and my dad met as undergraduates at the University of Pennsylvania in the early 70s. Definitely both probably call themselves Black nationalists. My parents have told me many, many times that if I'd been born a girl, my name would be Sojourner. And so that's the type of family I was raised in. But my dad was raised on welfare. He lost his dad when he was 8 years old. He made his way to Penn because he was also a really good athlete. He captained the basketball team there. My mom grew up completely different. Her parents migrated from the Deep South, ended up in Chicago. My grandfather worked for the State Department around the globe. She was educated at one of the best boarding schools in the country. And she went to Penn on almost a full scholarship. But when she chose to go to med school at Columbia, she did so with a lot of intentionality. She didn't want to treat rich kids on the Upper West Side. And she graduated from Columbia and immediately, intentionally, chose to do her residency in South Baltimore. And so that's why our family moved to D.C. And at the time, D.C., our neighborhood, was primarily a working class, primarily Black community. The crack epidemic hit Washington, D.C. in the 1980s, and my neighborhood became literally the poster for mixed income. We lived in a single-family home, but 5 blocks away was public housing. 3 blocks away were rentals, and we all shared the same amenities package. We all shared the same bus line, subway to and from school every day, and we all shared some sense of hope. And so our company is named Langdon Park Capital. That's the recreation center. That was at the heart of our community. I think of so many volunteer coaches and mentors who worked at Langdon Park Rec. It was also connected to a public library. So when I left banking, so after football, which was a very brief time in my professional career, I was only in the NFL for 4 years. So I retired at 25 and I had to figure out what was next. Went to grad school and had the good fortune of not having to go do what most people who go to get an MBA do. I didn't have to run to go be an investment banker or a management consultant. I had the luxury of trying to figure out where I wanted to apply the skill set. And I did become a banker in the real estate finance group, but after almost a decade and a half of financing Class A, multifamily, big box retail, large industrial distribution facilities for some of the largest clients I worked at 2 banks that they covered, I decided to become intentional about applying that technical skill set with a lot of what had been my personal passion. I raised my family here in LA. And so we launched our company in 2021. It was a good time to go raise capital. And it was a good time to raise impact-focused capital that also wanted real returns. And so that's what we've set out to do. We also have an office in my hometown. So we invest in the DMV area as well. But we've tracked the migration and population trends for Black and Latino families in large, high-cost cities like LA, like DC, like Oakland, and that's where we've chosen to invest our dollars, but with intentionality. It's also what happens to be our differentiator as an owner-operator as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you for that that context for both your career and your practice. You talk about Oakland, DC, Los Angeles. We've already talked a little bit about population movements, particularly of African Americans in this country. Those are 3 of the places with kind of the biggest exodus of Black families from kind of core traditional Black neighborhoods. I know that you don't only service, African Americans and African American communities. You work in Latino communities as well. South LA has kind of made that shift from being a largely Black community to a largely Latino community. But my question is, how do you talked about intentionality. How do you think about investing in these communities during times and during a context in which there's so much movement out of Black communities, particularly in these cities that you're talking about?
Yeah, you hit on something that we've had to be really hyper-focused on, especially in Los Angeles. So in general, we are a shrinking population in this city. Although LA is still very culturally Black, when you think of the arts that are here, when you think of, Devean can speak to this, the sports, the music, the entertainment, it feels like this is a much Blacker city than it actually is. By census tract data, we've got 8% of the population, and that number is shrinking. By contrast, Jackson, Mississippi, and I just looked this stat up, is 80% Black. Right. And Texas is the second Blackest state in the country, followed by Florida, which is the third Blackest state in the country. So the migration is happening in reverse. But one of the reasons that we are here in Los Angeles is because, one, this is still a very strong real estate community. Like in terms of how you can attract institutional capital, where you can find large transactions that really satisfy the needs of institutional investors, you need big cities to be able to do that. But we now think of LA as more of a brown city. So we own apartments in East Hollywood. We own in the Crenshaw district in Baldwin Village. For folks who are from South LA, that's the jungles, but we are very intentional about calling it Baldwin Village. We don't live in the jungle, we live in villages. And we own the San Gabriel Valley, which is almost 70% Latino, Asian, and other. But those are brown communities, and they're now experiencing some of the exact same challenges that many of us did 25 or 30 years ago in terms of having high quality, safe, and affordable housing. So we work more on the preservation side. Everything that we've done to date has been acquiring existing assets and making sure that those communities are safe and they're clean. They have resident services that meet the needs of the Black and brown residents in those neighborhoods. And preservation is just as important as developing, as I'm sure everyone here would agree.
Thank you. So earlier today, we hosted a panel on Zoom where we talked about the challenges for Black people and other underrepresented groups entering the real estate and development sector generally. So we shared at that event that nearly 111,000 of the 112,000 real estate development companies in the US are white-owned. Only 2% of C-level positions are held by Black men, and surely the number is even lower for Black women. And I think if we're gonna have a conversation about Black people building housing in Black communities, or many of the challenges of in development in these communities, we need to start by talking about why so few Black people are working in development really in any capacity. So I guess, one thing I want to ask you, Malika, and you can join in, Malcolm, is, if you can recap maybe a little bit about what y'all talked about this afternoon for folks who weren't there, and then also, looking at your staff and your colleagues, that is as Black-dominated a planning and development firm as I could possibly have ever seen.
It's all Black.
It's all
Black.
I didn't want to make
All Black,
assumptions
all day.
about everybody,
No. All of us.
but it's all
Every
Black.
single one of us.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
On purpose. Intentionally Black.
Don't say that too loud. The EEOO people will be there somewhere. But how did you, without getting you prosecuted, like how did how did that come to be? How do you make that work? And maybe more importantly, like how does that help your firm be better at business?
So there was something I said today, and it rings true every time I think about affordable housing. If you don't ask me, it's not for me, right? So if I'm going to change the face of planning and development and banking, I have to have representation in those spaces. And it is the hiring practices at NEOO Partners. We don't go looking. D'Angelo's he didn't even look for me. I called him to congratulate him for making us look good out there. And by the way, we're named after the same person. So I called him on the Malcolm side to say, hey, you're making me look good out here, thank you. And he said, you want to work here? And I said, yeah, let's go. And every other person that I speak to that works there, it has been a similar experience. So I say, I don't have a boss, I have a family, and I don't have a job, I have a passion. I gave up working a long time ago. I have a passion, and it is a passion for justice in housing, not just affordable housing, but attainable housing with services that go around it. And by the way, financial literacy is a service. Can we get there? Just saying, a little bit of a platform.
So, Malika, if I can follow up, of course, life is intersectional, right? Our experiences and how we're treated has intersections. Do you experience particular challenges as a Black woman in real estate and development?
Absolutely. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. Especially when the construction people that I am paying, by the way, I signed the check, are telling me that they're going to operate in a way that I said that they can't operate. It's fun. It's joy. Fortunately and unfortunately for me, I went to architecture school, and if anybody has gone through an architecture master's program and done one critique, they'll understand that you have to leave your feelings at home. So I started off working at Merrill Lynch in investment banking, and I would step into every room and I would say, hey, you guys can relax. Diversity has arrived. Chill, take it down. I'm here. And that has been my response to every space. Like, you can relax now. Diversity's here. And not the other way around. Right. Not that I'm uncomfortable.
Right.
So it's I take it on me.
Putting yourself out there.
Absolutely. All
Right.
day, every day.
Right.
And that was the advice that I had for students today. Like, be comfortable in your skin first.
Right.
And then you can walk into every room like, hey, this is what I have.
So you've talked, Malika, about successes in building an office that looks like the community you serve. What are some of the maybe I'll start with Malcolm. What are some of the barriers that we face, either as managers, leaders, recruiting people to work in your firms, or as putting yourself in the mind of a young Black entrepreneur or somebody who wants to work in development? Like, what are the barriers that they're facing?
So first, I mean, that's absolutely the right question to ask. You have to acknowledge that those barriers are real, they exist. I will also say I've been extremely privileged. I was born and raised in a working class neighborhood that at some point between 1987 and 1991 became almost a war zone, as DC had the ignominious title of being the murder capital of the US. But I got to go home every day to a very safe space. It wasn't until I got to high school, I didn't notice. Sometimes I laugh with my parents, like, I can't believe y'all did this to me and my younger brothers. But I went to a Jesuit high school in DC. They forced me to go there. I didn't want to leave the neighborhood to go to this high school. I was in school with Dan Quayle's kids and four-star generals had their kids at this school. And the first week, they call up the students who were doing work study. So I was a football player, and I've been on campus already for a month and a half practicing with the football team. So I already know pretty much every Black student, and we're from the same types of neighborhoods. And they say, okay, so-and-so, your work study assignment is going to be this. So-and-so, your work study assignment is going to be this. And first of all, think about the fact that they did this in the assembly with the whole student body there, so you kind of called out. But so I'm waiting to get out of my seat, and my name never got called. And it wasn't until almost that moment that I realized, oh, shit, I guess we could have been living in Potomac or Fairfax or Alexandria too. It's just that my parents chose to have us be, I said, has anybody seen the movie Boys in the Hood? Yeah, Furious Styles should be based on my dad. That was my father's role in our neighborhood and in my life. But that was very intentional. So taking a step back about the barriers, one of the things that I learned really early on in this business was actually in business school. So again, this is privilege. I went to undergrad at the University of Notre Dame. I was obviously on scholarship as a football player. Played NFL for a few years afterwards. I was in business school at Carnegie Mellon. We had to do a capstone project for our urban planning class that required you to go build out. Yeah, so you know what these classes are like. Okay, so you had to build out, model a real life development plan, some business. And so I had the privilege of this Notre Dame and football background. So I go back to the athletic department at the University of Notre Dame, and I start gathering information for a mock development that would be for sale condos within close proximity to the campus, because for anyone who's ever been to South Bend, Indiana, on a whole football weekend, the population of the city is increased by like 35% because nobody wants to be in South Bend unless there happens to be a home football game. So I'm like, this is a good idea. We can build for sale condos within a half-mile radius of campus, and people will actually buy these condos because they want to have a place to stay when they come see Notre Dame play, USC, Ohio State, and they'll rent them out for the remaining, 46 weekends of the year. So the athletic department gives me full access to every bit of the university's urban planning department, and I go do this what I thought brilliant research report. I got a pretty good grade in the class, and then I look up 3 years later, and the University of Notre Dame has actually done this. So if anybody's been to Notre Dame at any point between 2009 and now, you will see brand new for sale condos, mixed use retail, And so that was a big lesson.
You got no percentage there?
Yeah, of course not. Of course not. This was before, I even thought about maybe an NDA or whatever. So the same methodology is how we thought about building Langdon Park Capital. We have to insert ourselves into the discussion, and that's why I actually have no, there's very little fear on our part that we can be busted by such and such alphabet organization for being too Black or too Latino, because that is the reason that we're able to make smart investment decisions in Crenshaw District, Hyde Park, Leimert Park, Prince George's County, Maryland, East Bay. We actually have on our investment committee people with cultural competency in those submarkets, and so that's why we're able to make smarter decisions. So it's not just diversity for the sake of diversity. That's what investors will respond to, because otherwise, just being pretty transparent, why wouldn't you go give $200 million to Blackstone or KKR or Carlyle if they had the same idea? They've been doing it for 30 years. They got a much bigger, so you have to figure out what is your differentiator, why should you be there? That's what I should have said to the folks at Notre Dame about building those condos. You need a former student athlete to help advise you on that. That was the one part I left out of my informational interviews.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for all the students in the audience, remember that. Put yourself in the picture.
Yeah.
Put yourself in the picture and think about how you could be accretive to whatever the business plan is.
And find your differentiator. I like that, for real. So I'll plug just one more thing. The Lewis Center produces a podcast called the UCLA Housing Voice Podcast. Shout out to Shane. And in a recent episode, not that recent at this point, we talked to Andre Perry from the Brookings Institution about his book, Know Your Price, and some of the work that he's done, which revolves around the devaluation of Black assets in Black communities. So one of the headline findings is that you control for a bunch of different attributes of different neighborhoods, crime, education, et cetera. Black homes are undervalued by about 23% or $48,000 per home. And so there's other data. Check out the book, check out their work at Brookings, check out our podcast, and then you don't even have to read. That's cool. But so we know, and I talked a little bit about it in my introduction, that we know that we have undervalued assets, but undervalued by the market, right? Undervalued by potential buyers. So, I first want to ask if this is a dynamic that you see, whether it's in St. Paul or Jackson or Los Angeles, where you struggle to kind of get people to believe that assets in these neighborhoods are of appropriate value. And if you do, what do you do to work around it? How do you kind of make these assets more saleable?
So it blows my mind that when I go with a potential developer to buy a naturally occurring affordable building in a devalued area, the building is not devalued when you want to sell it to me. Isn't that amazing? All of a sudden, it costs just as much as the one across the street. It blows my mind every time. The only time that valuation thing hits me is when I'm talking about new construction. And then when I'm talking about new construction, I hear, oh, we've got to be careful because we can't lend you that much money because the building's not going to be worth that. How is it that the building across the street that is run down is worth $6 million, but this brand new building isn't going to be worth $7 million? Your math is not mathing, sir. Mm-hmm. So the way that I handle that is I make sure that I surround my developers with partners that understand culturally what the issue is. And so they come in prepared to deal with, we may have this gap. The appraiser may come in and say that this building is worth XYZ. So we've got a foundation on deck that's going to cover the gap. So you come in with all of your cards. You can't miss one.
Malcolm?
So what Malika said is absolutely what we lived through on the valuations front. So we've purchased naturally occurring affordable housing, which is an acronym that is it's a stand-in for lowercase a affordable housing. But what we describe it as is it affordable for people who live and work in South LA or Oxon Hill, Maryland, or Richmond, California? But we have not been privy to any discounts because we happen to be a Black-owned real estate investor. One of the bigger challenges, taking a step back, and I saw our partners from Walker Dunlop, Chris Montez, whose firm has done a tremendous job helping us access debt capital for the buildings that we purchased, walk in. But on the investor side, one of the bigger challenges now when we're trying to go buy that same naturally occurring affordable housing, so think of a 1960s build, 300-unit apartment building in Torrance, Carson, Capitol Heights, Maryland. The pushback is, well, that building is now too old. And we don't think that the CapEx costs that you're gonna have to spend over the next 5 to 7 years to make it modern are low enough to actually pencil. And so that's been one of the things that we have to go back to the drawing board. And in today's market, we have to figure out public-private partnerships. In 2021 and 2022, capital was more than okay with low teens, maybe even high single-digit returns on that same product type. Now the return requirement is much closer to mid-teens, and those deals just don't pencil because, as Malika said, you're not getting a discount because you say we're going to keep this building affordable. So you got to pay market price. We get maybe some discount on our debt financing because we plan to keep it affordable, but that's anywhere from 30 to 50 basis points on a loan that instead of being 6.5% might be 6. So we have to figure out how to lean into our partners at HACLA, lean into our partners at the Prince George's County Housing Authority to partner with us on buying these assets, and that'll bring our cost basis down so we can still do our work.
So I'll go back to you, Malcolm, since this is mostly about housing and, since, I guess most of your housing work is in the rental business.
That's right.
So most Americans, Black or white, aspire to home ownership, but it has a special place, I think, in the hearts of the Black community in particular because of the times and the decades in which we were kept out of home ownership, right? So 50 years ago, the home ownership rate among Blacks was about 30 percentage points lower than whites. Today, the gap is about 30 percentage points. So very little change, right? Because of that, I think that when developers come into Black neighborhoods proposing to build rental housing, there's a bit of skepticism or a sense of maybe this is not what we need, or we need home ownership opportunities. So is that something that you face in the communities that you try to build in or invest in? And, I guess, do you have ideas about how to kind of also raise ownership levels within these communities?
Yeah, so one, there's a powerful, and these are facts, sociologists will agree with this, but these are also my opinions. There's something powerful about owning in your community. There's something powerful about saying, we have a stake in what happens here. I vote for the city councilman or city councilwoman because they have a vested interest in my business that's here. I own a home that's here. My children go to public school in this district. That's absolutely, that's a real thing. But we have to face reality on where wages have moved, which is to say not much, and where home prices have moved. Again, just going back a little bit of a history lesson. So my mom is here with me tonight. She flew in for Mother's Day. We were talking about
Very nice.
the good old days in D.C. She shared that she and my dad bought the first home that I was raised in Northeast D.C. in 1986 for $70,000 and a 14% mortgage. Now, I did not press her further and say, what was you and Dad's combined income at that time? But I'm guessing it was probably somewhere in the vicinity of $45,000 to $60,000. And so absorbing a 14% mortgage on a $70,000 home made home ownership very attainable.
Yeah.
Median home price in LA, to LA County today, north of $650,000 with area median income just shy of $100,000. What's up, good brother? Now you already know. If this was 20 years ago, that's a $10,000 fine for coming in late like that. You can give it to all the black developers sitting in the audience. My man. Good to see you. So the economics mean that there are far more renters by necessity today, and that's who we serve. These are people who are working 40 hours a week. They may have a job with benefits. Both parents may be working. More than one adult in the household may be working. So our idea of ownership is, how can you take pride in the building that, by the way, every asset we own has Langdon Park in the title. So there's some element of pride that this is owned by an owner who thinks like the folks who are actually renting, and we provide amenities that meet their needs just like you would if you owned your single family home. So that's what we have to respond to the economics of these high cost cities where we operate. I would say in some other states there might be more opportunities to economically develop for sale housing that's more affordable. It's really challenging here in Southern California without benefit of a lot of subsidy.
For real, yes. Okay, let's say hello to Devin. Welcome, my brother.
How you doing? I'm sorry.
It ain't but the third quarter, my friend.
Okay.
Do not worry.
Right on time.
Right on time. So I will introduce Devin right now, a man who needs no introduction in Los Angeles, but I'll do it anyway. 3-time NBA champion with the Lakers, founder of George Group North, which is a housing development company in Minneapolis. And he's also the president of Building Blocks, which is a nonprofit focused on affordable housing and community development. A bit of a personal connection, which isn't that personal. But, there's 50 million Lakers fans running around. Not a lot of them saw him play live in college because he went to Augsburg College in Minneapolis. I was down the road at McAllister. So when he came down I-94 to dunk all over my McAllister Scots, I was sure to be there. I wasn't on a team. I wouldn't do anything crazy like that, but I was there. So thank you for coming, Devin, and apologies that we didn't get you here on time. Devin, I will send it to you because we are all waiting to hear your voice. So obviously you had a very successful first career, but you have gone on to this second career, like our other panelists, in fact, in housing development, real estate development. How did you decide that that's kind of what you wanted to do in your next chapter? And tell us a little bit more about what your company and your nonprofit organization does in Minneapolis.
Well, really, I got into development in real estate because year 7, I sat on the market for like 2 months when I left LA. So I was here my first 7 years. Third year, I signed my contract at 1201 at free agency for 4 more years. 7th year, I sat in the market for like 2 months, and I was like, ooh, what's next? And then at that point, we had a class that I took over the summer at Stanford with some of the top professors, and we just for NBA players. And what we did was each day we took a profession. We took franchising one day, and they had all the franchise people come in, give us case studies. We did sports management, we did venture capitalists, we did real estate. Each day we did something different. And real estate was the one that really stood out in my mind. I was always a real estate guy. I always liked design. I always liked building. Everyone has their thing. Some guys have car fetish, things that they liked, cars or jewelry. I was always a house guy. I was always remodeling my house or redecorating. People would come over. I'd had a whole new bathroom. Like, what are you doing? And so that was my thing. So I was like, I always knew I had a passion for it. Once I retired, or I started getting into it prior to retiring, but at the same time, I was always our community engagement guy with the Lakers. I always want to reach back because there was some old pros like Pooh Richardson, guys that I was a guy in free, getting free lunches and going to camps for free. So I always wanted to reach back and help out. I had a program called Why Can't I Go? And it was based out of Minneapolis. And it was 20 students and chaperones got a chance to come out here every year I played here. I would fly them out, let them go to a game, meet some of the players, and let them go to Disneyland and take care of their food and travel. And what that did was just really open up kids' minds to like dreaming and thinking there's another world outside their four walls or their neighborhood. So after I got into that, I was always our ambassador here in LA, going into the inner city and do our Read to Achieve, and really it was mutually beneficial for me and the community because I really felt good that I can really make an impact and kids would listen, and it really made their year. They were talking about me coming to read a book. A Laker came and read a book for 30 minutes, and it really did something to them. So all those things kind of were in my head when I was, coming up with what I'm gonna do after playing my playing days. And what really kind of got me was all of the guys I played with in college. They all kind of got into social working, or they were teachers or principals. And anybody that knew me that worked with kids or organization, their favorite thing would say is, "Hey man, can you come and talk to my kids? Can you come and talk?" So I was going around, mentoring and talking to kids, and then that's when I really realized that the stability of their housing situation and the lack of income really was an issue. So I'm here thinking to myself, I'm going to talk to kids and say, hey, eat your vegetables, you'll grow like me and get good grades. And they don't really know where their next meal is coming from or where they're staying. They're either staying at grandma's house tonight, they're at mom's boyfriend tomorrow, they're somewhere else, so they're missing school. And so I said, well, what can I do to start with getting them some stable housing? And that was affordable housing. I'd always owned this block of buildings in my neighborhood. I had bought it when I was playing and just had it for years. And that was when I said, why don't I go ahead and get into doing affordable housing? And I can house some families here, and I can also house my nonprofit that I had started to work with kids. And that's kind of how I got started. And the two combination of both of them, my nonprofit and my other hand is my for-profit. The nonprofit kind of works with more of the social services of the development, because all of these developments that we do in the areas, it's not just the brick and mortar that need that's a part of the project. There's social services, and my nonprofit partners with a lot of the social services, whatever that is that comes with the building. Sometimes we may have single mothers that need health care, or there's some people that need a GED, or whatever the case may be. We get them help. And then we also work with the kids in the building. So we do mixed use buildings. So the kids that, they can come in after school in that dangerous time from 3 to 7 where they're usually unsupervised. So we try to distract them and give them things to do when they come off the street. So when the parents come home from work, they're well fed and homework is done. And so that's how both of my organizations, one hand, my nonprofit and my for-profit. And the for-profit, obviously, this is a business, and someone needs to guarantee the loans. There are some loan guarantees. There has to be some financial strength. So that's how we kind of combine both of them together.
And how many units do you have that you've built and managed to that?
So I'm self-managing in Minnesota. The other units I have that are in North and South Carolina, we have about 200 units there. I got another 80 going up in New Orleans. And then I have 112 right now up the street in North Minneapolis. And then I got another 300 in the pipeline coming up this year.
Fantastic. So, where's my timer? Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Phoebe. I'll go back to Malika. What do you think it will take to bring more investment into Black communities? We talked a little bit about devaluation and, some of the stories were told about value. So this can include investment in new and rehabilitated housing. And then also, a tough question. How do we make sure that more of that investment is led by Black people and benefits, where there can be kind of a retention of that value into the community?
Vote.
Oh. And vote local, maybe.
Yes. Start from school board to city council to all the way to president. Vote. Because these are the people that are making those policies, that make those changes. And if you don't choose them correctly and understand what they stand for, you will be at the bad end of it. And can't remember the poem, but eventually it will come for you.
You talked about policy. Are there, we don't want to just elect the right leaders and assume everything will be fine. We've got a lot of planners and policymakers in the room. What are some things that we can, what are some policies and some changes that you might like to see done?
Okay, so right now, low-income housing tax credits come out of IRS code. Anybody that knows anything about tax code it's ridiculously complex for no apparent reason. So if we can start to demystify some of that and pull it away from tax code, and maybe even think of housing as you think of public works. Like, you need it. We're not bears. We can't live outside. But we pay more for our roads and care more about our roads than we do about our homes. So if it were to become a resource or a public works instead of the way we have it now, it could be helpful.
Devin or Malcolm, do you have big policy ideas?
I'll share one, and this is probably the right audience to talk about this. I do wish that more blue states would think about the way red states typically design economic policy that supports capitalism. And I say that, again, very intentionally. I shared my background. Not because I believe that it's our preordained destiny to vote Democrat in every election, but since I've been old enough to vote, I've always voted Democrat, largely because I believe in the social policies that many of our elected officials who are Democrats tend to have. But I was invited to this dinner with Karen Bass next week. I'm very excited to be there. I was a huge supporter of her campaign a year and a half ago, and I'm glad she's giving us an audience. But one of the things I plan to talk to her about is the fact that rent control has so many unintended consequences for those who were raised in cities where there are big housing projects. Like in my neighborhood, Montana Terrace.
I didn't see that coming.
Yeah, that's real.
That's what got the snaps today.
But I'm gonna explain.
We're not at UCLA anymore.
Who's ever been to a housing project and said, this place looks like it has a lot of hope, just because the rents are really low? That didn't exist at Montana Terrace, Sursum Quarter, Brookland, Cabrini Green, Marcy Projects, Queensbridge. That doesn't work. A bunch of poor people with a low tax base means poor performing schools, means potholes that don't get fixed, police that don't show up. Like, those are the things that happen when you say, I only want poor people to live in this housing. And also, by the way, this is an owner who thinks a lot like Devin just described. Like, I do want to do things to make our apartment community nicer, but if I can't raise rents, even after someone decides to leave our community, right, because they've gotten a better job, they moved out of state, whatever the case may be, and I can't raise rents just to offset, one, the cost of renovating that unit, the cost of insurance, which is now increased by 30%. When we go buy a new building, when we buy a building in Southern California, we often have to do a seismic retrofit because, earthquakes. Like, all that costs money. So if my rents have to stay low, where can I then afford to increase the social services or amenities package or just the safety residents who live there. So Mayor Bass has been very reasonable. She's expressed a real willingness to look at new solutions. But big picture, let me just repeat again. I wish more blue states thought about elected officials who think about economic policy like red state elected officials do. Now, I'm not talking about somebody trying to take critical race theory out of schools or trying to tell you what bathroom you have to go to. That's like a whole other conversation. I'm just talking about, can we not have all of the poor people living in this zip code in all of our major cities across the country?
Right. And, and it's not necessarily that that capitalism and real estate development is going to save it's going to make everybody's housing situation perfect, but we have a market-based housing system, and we have to, if I can interpret what you're saying, like we have to let it work, right? And we have to.
Absolutely. Capitalism is super efficient. Like anybody who's taken one econ class or worked at a bank or run a business knows capital flows to where capital flows. If you can make money doing it, people who are capitalists will find it. If you can't make money doing what the three of us do, then BlackRock, Blackstone, Carlyle, Langdon Park Capital have a much more challenged perspective on why should I invest there.
Right. Devin, I wanted to get your perspective on something we talked about a few minutes ago, which is devaluation of Black communities in real estate. You're from North Minneapolis, and that's where you have at least got a lot of your start in the real estate business. And, my assumption is that when you try to, get loans, get capital to develop housing in that community, that you're told that, you're either told or you're charged as like it's a riskier investment than in other places, or if you want to sell any of those assets, that they're not valued in the same kind of way, of course, that they would be in South Minneapolis. So is that something that you continue to encounter in the business you do, in the neighborhoods you try to invest in, and how do you kind of navigate that landscape?
Well, that's my pitch to the community, is that what I'm trying to do is bring more value instead of devaluing it, as if when more resources go into it, when there's more restaurants, when there's more new living wages, apartments, all that brings your value up. When there's less crime on the corner, when there's more eyeballs on the corners, it brings the value up. So that's how I'm really working with it. But I want to add to one point of the previous question.
Great.
That my experience and the low income, I don't remember the exact year, but that's the low income housing tax credit program in the new markets. They've been around and they do very well. They do very, very well. Not for us, but for the government, they do very, very well. It's very expensive. I just closed on a new market tax deal, and the fees attached to our low-income housing tax credits in the new markets, the fees attached, they're making out. So that would be one of the things that would help with the process as well, is they're expensive. Sometimes our affordable housing projects are more expensive than market rate.
Right.
And then
Big
really,
problem in Los Angeles. Yeah.
And then how we have to stack our sources. We may have 8 to 10 different sources of people that put money in. Well, there's 8 to 10 things that I have to do for that person. No one gives us $500,000 or a grant or a deferred loan without something in return. So now we have to make all those guys happy. And then, then it's the fight with the attorneys. I don't have anything less than maybe $200,000 or $300,000 attorney bill from the end of the project. And that's because there's 10 sources that now he has to go with the city and state and say, oh, we want to put our money in last. Everybody wants to be last. And then he has to figure out, well, we want green paint. Well, we want green paint too, whatever it is. And so everyone has the same needs. So it's just like, it's very expensive. So I would say to that last point, the expense needs to come down, but I don't know if it will be because it's doing very well. I don't think it's going anywhere.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the low income housing tax credit is something you would never start right now designing the low income housing tax credit as your principal lever for producing subsidized housing. You know, it was a 1986 tax reform that threw a bunch of liquidity in the multifamily housing market, but it creates it makes every developer like create all of these incredible stacks of capital to make it work. So yeah, I can't disagree with that, but it's like it's the thing we have now. You know, there's nothing else.
Yeah, no one else is coming in with $12 million.
No,
So
no, and there's no production subsidy besides low income housing tax credit.
And then the outcome is it keeps the new supply of affordable housing artificially low.
Right.
Because it's just, you got to navigate this Byzantine system, and you need a consultant for a consultant for a consultant. You end up producing less than 5% of the new affordable housing units that any one of our investment markets actually needs, because it's so challenging. And the big institutional investors say, well, of course I'm going to go invest in market rate deals where it's my GP equity, an LP contributing 90 or 95%, and it's very easy to understand. You can get a 65 or 70% LTV loan, and away we go. Like you can wash, rinse, repeat that 15 times in a year. It's very difficult to do 15 affordable housing projects a year unless you happen to be as large as Related or Bridge Investment Group, which themselves are institutions.
Right. I'm being told it's time to go to Q&A. Shane, what's our system?
Well, I have some questions here.
Cool.
I think maybe it's my job to ask
Sure.
people to. We have a microphone somewhere?
Yeah.
Where's that? I will call someone's name. You can let me know if you want to ask the question, or I can just ask it for you. The first one's Elias. You want to ask? Okay. Elias asks, I went with a Devin question first because we only had you a short time. Question is for Devin George. After living in the South for 10 years in Houston while visiting Louisiana, I think this is what Elias did. Can you talk about your New Orleans development plans and what made Louisiana a state you want to invest in? Thank you.
So the first affordable project I did was in North Minneapolis, and I've gotten to these other areas from other athletes and other people that I know in those regions. And what happened was I kind of built this model in North Minneapolis, and then I can't remember who it was, but it kind of put it out there, and other athletes started contacting me and saying, hey, I want to put one of those buildings in my neighborhood. And then I've always been talking to other football players and basketball players that I know of saying, hey, why don't we get past the transactional things we're doing for our communities, and they're needed, the turkey drives and the toy giveaways, but we're here today and gone tomorrow. What are we going to do for our community that can last? What can we do for our community that can uplift it, bring more resources, provide jobs? So that's really what I started doing. And then when they came in and kind of saw a day of how things were working, they got a chance to come in at around 2 o'clock and start seeing kids come in, going into the after school program, seeing how that works, seeing how they're getting homework help, seeing the food come in. We feed them before they go home. Their parents come home. Then they have a kid that's been out of trouble in a safe environment, got help with their homework. If you didn't have homework, you're going to do something. We're going to learn something. We feed them. Minneapolis Public Schools provided food for me, so they would drop it off every day, warm meals, and then I'd feed them. By 5:36, their parents come home, half the job is done, and then they just go upstairs and they go back home. So that was really why I got into those other regions, is the model I built in Minneapolis, and other athletes wanted to do the same thing.
Leonard, did you want to ask your question or want me to ask it? Okay. And you don't need to respond to me because this is not my question. Just all right. So Leonard asks, while developing these projects, especially in Los Angeles, how are you ensuring, but maybe not just in Los Angeles, because two of our guests are from Minnesota, how are you ensuring that the work of the building trades goes to Black businesses and not just Black and Latino labor?
I'll just take the first shot at that very intentionally. Again, that speaks to what we consider to be our differentiator. So just by virtue of the fact that I'm a real estate professional who's been in the business now for 19 years, I do have contacts who are in the diverse spectrum throughout the ecosystem. So vendors, everyone from our attorneys to accountants to the trades that do work on our business are in some way either first or second degree of separation away. So we very intentionally, we always have to look for best in class. That's a given, table stakes almost. But we are willing to go deeper and consider why this trade is better suited to work on our building in Baldwin Village, why this management company, property management company, is better suited to work on our asset in Prince George's County, Maryland. I would just say, with some level of intentionality, you are going to tend to find, especially when your leadership looks like this, you're going to tend to find more diverse professionals to work with. That's why it matters for us to be in the room, and not just in the room, but making decisions.
I'll add to that and piggyback. Intentional is correct. You really have to be intentional, and I was, and it's helped me because one of the things that happens is once they can rely on, there's a possibility for when Devin puts this development up that I'll have possible work for 2 years. You start having people push for you, when there's projects that's coming through at City Hall or wherever you need to go to, because they know, hey, if that guy gets work, I have a good chance of working, and people want work on their books. And the second thing is, as a developer, there are some, I don't know if they're intentional, but there are some rules that really push out small minority businesses from participating in these projects. There are rules that when you have to hand certain things in or have to have certain bids, a lot of people that we want to do the work, they're working, they can't get bids in. They don't have an estimator. That's while they're working a job or on a site somewhere, they got an estimator getting us bids back. So there's intentional things or that need to be changed that I look in and see, that I take my time and I say, well, we're not going to move until he gets his bid in, because I know he works on his job every day. I know he's on the electric, I know he's on site all day, and now he has to come home and write up an estimate. So I just take my time and say, we're not going to move until you get your bids in, until you show it.
Wow, that's cool.
So I've actually requested that there be an apprentice program. So if there's a situation where I'm working on a large project and we don't have anybody of color, especially a general contractor of color in the Twin Cities who has the bonding capacity, I request that whoever the general contractor is, that they have a apprentice program, and that person becomes a site supervisor, and it's on their books. So that way their company shows up the next time they have to do bonding. They have it on their books that they've done a $20 million project and not just a whole bunch of $500,000 houses.
I'm going to go to Rashid. Do you want to ask your question or? No? More for me.
I see you, Rashid. I see you.
All right, so I'm just going to paraphrase this question. We've kind of talked about different barriers, but I think it would just be interesting to hear a little bit more about some of the barriers that you face and how you're overcoming these. Anything that really just hasn't come up yet that you feel like is worth discussing. Maybe there's nothing, but
Capital, and access to capital is a barrier for emerging developers and particularly people of color. If you're coming from a divested community and you don't have anything to put up as collateral for a loan and you don't have a book, then it is very difficult for you to access capital.
And how have you overcome that?
Philanthropy, working with CDFIs. I have some friends right now that are crowdfunding a net zero fourplex that they will sell. So they're designing it like row homes so that they can sell it, and they're crowdfunding their pre-development funds. So you get creative.
So same answer, but with a bit more nuance on my response. Access to capital isn't the largest problem that we face. I think institutional capital has responded relatively well to our investment, or did respond relatively well to our investment thesis 3 years ago. So we raised a lot of money at a time when it was easier to go raise big sums of money. And now when we talk to large asset managers like BlackRock, big insurance companies like Prudential and MetLife, they're still very interested in doing deals with us, which is exciting to hear, but the return thresholds have changed. So as the market has shifted and you can just get higher returns by lending, many of those same types of investors now want to go do private credit as opposed to do a deal that's going to only return an 11% IRR over a 10-year period. So thinking about maybe more holistically the benefits of investing in our types of housing would help get those investors a lot more comfortable with slightly lower financial returns, but much larger returns for the greater good. But again, capital tends to be really efficient. If you ask somebody who's a CIO at CalPERS, one of the largest investors in real estate, obviously, biggest state pension plan in the country, you ask them if they can go get a 16 investing in whatever, or they can get an 11 investing with us. That's kind of a no-brainer what they would choose. So we have to make a strong case for where that 500 basis point delta is going to be made up by the resident services that we provide, which make communities safer, which makes for better outcomes for the state 5, 10, 20 years from now, because those kids have gone to after-school programming. That's the nuances. I'll say with institutional capital that we talk to a lot.
I would say the competitive nature of the seasoned, wily, veteran developers that want to keep the sandbox and have them be the only one to play in it. That's been my, because the reality of it is it's competitive. There's a small resource, a pool of money, of dollars that we are all going after to make our capital stack look right and to get our projects to close, and it gets competitive. And I've had some real moments that people have tried to tell me, just because you have access to capital, you still, you know what? And you just you know what with some money. And it's getting that serious where I went from just a cute story to this guy helping his neighborhood to now he's starting to threaten our bottom line. And it's business is real. And I had some real moments, but I'm a competitor. You know what I mean? And so I think it's a game. I'm going to compete. You're not going to scare me. And I just go back, and one of my most proud moments is I'm from a Division III school. You know where I'm from. And I was drafted in the first round. I'm the only one in NBA history to ever do that. So you know I have a competitive, inner burning desire. If I want to get something done, I'm going to stay locked in and get it done. And I just transferred that, now that I can't run and jump, to business. So that's my spiel.
I bet your not running and jumping looks a lot better than most of our not running and jumping, but we won't get out there and do that. Shane.
Michael Banner, I think you might want to ask your question.
Actually, I have a different question now.
All right, let's hear it. Here, I'll bring this up.
And the question is sparked by something Malcolm just talked about.
Really good to see you, Michael, by the way.
Oh, thank you. Always good to be seen. So the notion of returns and the hurdle rates that you have to deal with, I have another friend who is a developer in Oakland. And the one thing he sensitized me to, that his mother was a school teacher. And like my sister, they're all invested in these public pension funds. And so the requirements of yield invested in Outer Mongolia, and the folks whose money you're investing can't get it invested in their communities. How does that issue get raised, or what's the way to raise that issue? Because I think if you were to argue that a lower return compared to something else that doesn't benefit the beneficiaries of those pension funds is where we need to start taking action on.
So first of all, I'd love to bring you on the next trip that I have to go talk to the Maryland State Treasurer about investing in one of our funds, because you just said it. You just said it. My father, who will be 71 on his next birthday, so his second career, so Devin and I had second careers. My dad was an entrepreneur and insurance agent for the first 20 plus years post-grad, and then he became a high school teacher and football coach. So for the last 18 years, my dad has been teaching public school in Prince George's County, Maryland. And so you're absolutely right. If the state of Maryland were to invest in one of our funds, which is investing in more affordable housing in the state, then the beneficiaries will be people like my father, who's going to retire with the Maryland State Teacher's Pension. That makes all the sense in the world. I guess the follow-up question I would ask is, how many folks who are actual pensioners sit on the investment committee for those pension funds, making decisions about where those dollars go?
That's still part of the game being rigged.
Mike, I feel like I co-host enough with you, and I'm sort of turning into a co-host here. Can I just hand you the list of questions?
Oh,
and you can ask?
oh gosh, sorry. Sure. My bad. Okay. We don't plan everything around here, you know what I mean?
So don't need this either. I'll still pass this around if anyone wants to ask the question themselves.
Ify, are you here? I didn't see you. Would you like to ask your question? Sure. I know you would.
Hello, I'm Iffy.
My bad. I knew I mispronounced that.
So my question was to Devin. I was interested in your mention of the New Orleans developments that you have, and so what I was wondering is, in the process of getting the construction going and all of those things, like, just as you're trying to maintain the affordability, like, has it been a challenge building climate resilience into those structures as well, to ensure that, as you mentioned, that like these structures that are being built are a sustainable benefit along, with longevity to the community?
Yeah, that's the price. It drives the price up than what I'm normally used to. There's so many different conditions of the soil and all that needs to be there. And plus everything has changed ever since Katrina, and everything's more stringent. So it was tough, and it really drove the price up. And we've actually just probably going to be closing in the next 2 months, but I've been working on that, and we've been trying to close, probably 3 years. It's taken that long. And then the prices, and then once we got into a good space, then lumber went up, and then we had to put these special, I think it's HELOC, something underneath for the building, and it was a mess. And then in New Orleans is a little bit different. It's a little political, and hands got to move and shake. This guy got to know who, and I got to know her cousin and have dinner here and get a blessing. Somebody got to give them some Pelican tickets, and then we can move. It worked. So you got to know who you know in New Orleans. And if you know, you know. So yeah, it's been tough, but it's well worth it. I love New Orleans. I have people there, and the community and the culture is great, and they're loving me coming into that community, building their affordable housing.
Probably better than whatever Brad Pitt was doing like 15 years ago. I don't think that went well. Brian Boulaya.
All right, good evening, everyone. Brian Bulaya, also an urban planner, also an emerging affordable housing developer. So I'll ask my second question, actually. So loving the conversation today, but I want to get to kind of the meat and potatoes of your team, right? So I'm sure you all are standing here and can attest to like the strength of your team. So real estate development, especially in affordable housing, can be stressful and a very long, arduous process, right? So how do you encourage and bolster your team to stay engaged, especially during long development life cycles? So you're thinking about 6, 8 years, going through financing, going through construction, long lead times. How do you keep them encouraged and keep them engaged?
I'll start. Well, my team of consultants, they're fine with it because they're getting paid for these years, and so it's an expense to me. So that's what makes it so. But my team, my management team, they're actually working, so they're busy with the job. So the main point, I don't have all of my consultants in-house that do my writing for my grants, that do my accounting. I don't have that. That's all outsources, the attorneys. So all that's a project expense, but it's all outsourced. So that's how I deal with it. And one other thing too is that when my first project, Minneapolis gave me $1.2 million, just like as an unexperienced developer in affordable housing, and people were kind of scratching their head, and they kind of walked me through the process. But it was the team that I had with me, the attorneys, the accountants that were real experienced in this, that they were real, that's what got them comfortable with an inexperienced developer in this, was the team of people that I had with me that have done these for years, high credibility. And so that's what kind of got me started.
So we say in Minnesota, only one new person on the boat. So you were the one new person on the boat. Everybody else had done it already.
That was it.
Yeah. And I am a consultant, so I actually have to spend a lot of time keeping my emerging developers focused on one thing at a time. You got to accomplish this one thing. And it is like herding cats, because and the market right now is changing so quickly that you want to just veer, and you have to just that laser focus on that one thing.
To that point, it is, sorry, but as the developer, we are herding cats, and you're responsible for each. Your accountant comes from here, then the accountant has to make sure they're talking to the attorney, but you're the center of it all. You have to hire all of them. Your consultants, they're doing their job, and then you have your staff that may have to report and give them information to put in there. So you have to be on your staff that's on site of getting the numbers or whatever questions they may have about the building or construction. So then you have your architect, or he's behind you coming in. So you have to manage all of those things. And when she says look at one thing or focus on one thing, you have to be able to multitask, because you'll get a phone call, 5 phone calls, there'll be one every different angle. And it could be overwhelming at times if you don't have the right mind frame to not panic.
So that last part, Brian, is spot on. I'll just add, on a football team, there are 2 people who can never have a bad day: the head coach and the starting quarterback. And as managing principal of your organization, you're both. So we have to have that ability to project optimism even in the face of a 6 or 8 year development process. But I'd also add this is really true for our firm and companies like ours. Like go to Glassdoor.com or salary.com and go look at the salaries for someone who's a senior person in asset management or acquisitions or an associate in real estate private equity. And so that's a motivating factor for our team members. Now for me, I'm incentivized to make sure they have all the resources they need to go do their jobs really well, because ultimately, as founder and CEO, there is more at the end of successful funds, successful recap. But we're very intentional about where we invest, the things we do with the projects that we own and operate. And so there's a sense from our team members, all of whom have incredible backgrounds in institutional real estate. They weren't getting to do this at Goldman Sachs. They didn't get to do this at Carlyle. They didn't get to do this at the places that they came from. So they are skipping to work in a lot of ways because our team looks different. It's a very safe space to talk about some of the things that they may not have been able to talk about when sitting in investment committee at their previous shops. And, we also have to pay the market rate. So we got to do that as well. But we were fortunate because I started the company at a time when raising capital for these sorts of businesses, a lot different environment. So now I've got to do what I started with. I got to be the head coach and the starting quarterback every single day and make sure the team remains just as optimistic as I am.
Thank you so much, y'all, for your questions, for your time. There are many more questions in our queue, and I'm sorry that we haven't gotten to them yet. Hopefully at the reception, we'll get some time to have some conversation that will further enlighten you. I wanted to hand it over to Evelyn Blumenberg. She is a professor of urban planning at the UCLA Luskin School and the director of the Lewis Center for Regional Policy Studies.
And clearly shorter than the members of the panel.
This is a very tall panel. Very tall.
So I'm going to even further adjust this. So it's my honor to bring this sort of evening to a close. So I'd like to start by thanking the panelists on a number of fronts. So first, for all of their efforts to make a substantial difference in the communities in which they're all working. I'd started in my notes to say Minneapolis and Los Angeles, and I'm sure I'm not going to get it all, but we've heard about New Orleans, we've heard about Oakland, we've heard about Washington, D.C., North and South Carolina. What else did I miss? I'm certain I missed other cities. So we heard, Jackson, Mississippi. Okay, so so their involvement in all these communities around the country. I also want to thank them for their leadership by example to those of us working in housing and community development and real estate, that leadership for how to make a measurable difference in our own communities. And then finally, I certainly learned a lot from all of your comments this evening, and so I want to thank all of the panelists for offering us tangible examples for how best to invest in Black neighborhoods to substantially improve the quality of life for Black families and communities, and I feel strongly for cities in general. And just a few kind of highlights of things, and I'm not, like the cities, I'm not going to hit on all of them. I think number one is the passion that you all bring to the work that you do related to impact-focused investments. The second, of course, is, and we're in dire need of this in Los Angeles and many other cities around the country, is the focus on both protecting and creating affordable housing. And not only, so the third is not only an attention to protecting and creating, but really thinking about all the package of other things that go along with housing. So we talked about, again, I'm going to miss some things here, but safety, cleanliness, resident services, amenities. I'm certain you could add other things to that list. And then finally, there's that creation and protection of, high quality housing in neighborhoods. But there's also, and Mike asked a lot of these questions, there's also a great attention to the process of development itself, that whole development process. You talked a lot about various aspects of it, one of which is the importance of cultural competency in this whole endeavor. The Lewis Center is all about producing and disseminating high-quality, policy-relevant research as the basis for bringing about change, and our focus of the Lewis Center is change in the larger LA region. Part of our program is convening experts, such as this evening's panel, to engage in discussions like the one that we had this evening. So Mike already started with this, but I want to encourage you to be a part of the Lewis Center efforts. This is the Lewis Center sort of plug. Mike was talking about his book, plugging his book, and I'm going to plug the Lewis Center. So please stay in touch, sign up for our newsletter, follow us on social media. And we already mentioned our Housing Voice podcast, thanks to Shane and Mike. So go on our website, take a look at the podcast as well. It's going to be easier for you to stay in touch with us in the future because UCLA, as well as the Luskin School of Public Affairs and the Lewis Center, are going to be shifting at least some of our efforts to new downtown Los Angeles space, which is going to be at 4th and Spring. So Mike started this already, and so I want you to be patient with me. As all of you know, I know many of you here have produced events of your own, and to pull off successful events like these takes a whole cast of individuals and organizations, so I'm going to do this hopefully quickly. It's like the Academy Awards where they get faster and faster at the end of the evening, but okay. But first I want to thank, I'm going to come back to the panelists, and you're going to have another round of applause, but first I want to thank Mike Lenz for moderating the panel. And I don't know, Madeline Brosen is the deputy director of the Lewis Center, and both Mike and Maddie were both the movers and shakers sort of behind this event. Thanks also, the Lewis Center has an all-star cast of staff, so Shane and Phoebe and Whitney and Claudia, thanks to all of them. Thanks to Tammy Barrero and Les Dunseth. Tammy, I hear, got in an accident on the way, but she was instrumental in this event, so thanks to them as well. I want to thank the Ziman Center for Real Estate, so Julie Linder and Tim Kawahari. Thanks to the Bunch Center for African American Studies. And then to come full circle, I couldn't think of a better venue in which to hold this event at this time in history and on this topic as the National Center for the Preservation of Democracy. So thanks to James Herr and all of his staff as well. Finally, I want to thank all of you for attending and engaging on such an important topic. So before we conclude, and we have a reception waiting for you, let's give our panelists another round of applause. Thanks, everyone.